coming up in this episode.
So no one's going to do something for nothing. And second of all, you need to try and create that value as quickly as possible for the user. And I think there were probably two of the challenges which we had with the first version. It's around the individual and it's around flexibility. And I think, in very simplistic terms, if they're getting the job done and they're happy to work from home and there's kind of no real detriment to the business in terms of that happening, then I'm not going to kind of prescribe to someone that they need to be in an office 2-3 days a week if that's not what they need to do.
Well, I can tell you categorically that once you release on Android, I will be the first to download the product because I
Awesome.
don't use an iPhone. But yeah, because 100%, this is exactly the kind of thing I would need.
I can remember in my early career, like I was in a rush to do everything. And I think, on reflection, I wish I'd stayed at companies a bit longer. I wish I'd probably tried something a little bit different. And sometimes you can be a little bit too overeager to do something. And I think that's probably, you can argue that with startups as well, right? It's like sometimes you can just be a little bit too quick to go to market or a little bit too quick with an idea.
The Founders Unplugged podcast, hosted by Greg McCallum. Raw, unedited conversations with entrepreneurs and startup founders.
Hello, John.
Hey, Greg, how you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm really good. That is some background you've got going on there.
Yeah, it's the first time ever today. I've recorded another episode today, and it's the first time ever I decided to play around with the backgrounds.
We're literally at polar opposite ends of the spectrum, right? Like literally all white.
It looks good. I normally just have the blurred background, so I figured I'd mix it up a bit because if you don't want to see like the kids' toys and stuff in the background, this is a bit better. And I'm feeling like a mad scientist today, so I feel this is appropriate.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. I might get a green screen at some point. I don't know. But anyway, how are you? You well? How's business?
Yeah, good. Kind of just slowly recovering after the intense heat that we've had here in London over the last week or so. It's kind of been really draining, to be fair. But yeah, kind of I was praying to the rain gods, which I don't think I've ever done in my life before. But I was kind of like, I just need it to be a few degrees cooler just to kind of like start functioning properly again. But yeah, no, other than that, all good.
The rain gods don't need much encouragement in this country, though, do they? Let's be honest. Like they're pretty much poised and ready to do their thing at any moment. Which is useful.
Which is why it was so strange to kind of be feeling so desperate for it to rain, right? It's like I've seen enough of it. Like we've had a crappy summer, really. So it's kind of like actually shouldn't be moaning too much, but yeah.
But when you're trying to work and concentrate and stuff, it's a whole different thing, isn't it? My son asked me recently, you know how kids just ask the most randomest questions. He asked me, like, what would you prefer, Daddy? And it's always this question, like two random extremes. Would you prefer to be really, really, really hot or really, really, really cold? And my answer is cold, because you can put a blanket on and you can make a fire. It's hot. When it's hot, man, there's nothing you can do about it. Like
I would probably go the other way, actually. Like normally I must admit I do prefer heat over being cold, but I do take your point. Like there's only you only need some clothing in order to get warm when it's cold, as opposed to there's only so much you can strip off when it's warm, right? So
there's no such thing that's like the opposite of a fire. You know what I mean?
No.
Yeah, unfortunately. Well, maybe a fan, but I suppose not quite the same. But maybe that's someone to invent. But anyway, it's great to have you on. As you noticed, we've already started recording. We just go straight into it. And like I always explain to everyone, there's not much structure to this show, but there is one part, and that is right at the beginning, which is that I, if you don't mind indulging me, just ask you to introduce yourself and your business, and just to kick us off and tell us about yourself.
Yeah, perfect. So Jon Chapman, founder, CEO of Digihome. So Digihome's a very early stage consumer app that inspires households to better manage and protect the home all in one place. So in terms of kind of my career background, for my sins, I started in insurance. I was on the Allianz Cornhill. I'm showing my age now because it was Cornhill. Graduate scheme, underwriting graduate scheme, and was on that for it lasted about a year, and then I was based in a lovely part of the world, Woking. And just I suppose as a quick story, I moved to London with my best friend. We had a place in Fulham, and I was probably the only person going on the opposite direction of the tube. So every morning I got the district line to Wimbledon, and then Wimbledon got the train down to Woking, and I was the only guy on the other side of the platform going away from central London, but still paying exorbitant rental just to live in Fulham. But so did that, moved into London about a year later, and then spent just shy of 10 years in insurance, underwriting property casualty risk across, and this was commercial, across UK, Europe. In a couple of the roles that I had, we did some global stuff, we did some reinsurance stuff. So that was all kind of interesting, but I hit must have been around 30, near enough on the nail, and kind of looked around and didn't really feel as though I was inspired enough for that to be my career for the next 30 years, and kind of felt like I was in a bit of a place with my career where it was like it was easy, and I never really enjoy that kind of feeling of just coasting. So decided that I'd try something different, and kind of jumped out of insurance and jumped into the world of startup. Got introduced to a founder at the time through a mutual friend who was pre-launch, but just about to launch his startup. We started talking, had some, mutually kind of worked together quite well, and kind of I helped him initially, just doing bits and pieces, and then that kind of evolved into kind of a full-time role, and that was a business called FixFlow, which was a repairs and maintenance software solution, which we sold into estate agents and property managers and a few other spaces. So I was there for 5.5 years, worked with two co-founders, and we grew that business, I think, quite substantially when you kind of compare it in terms of the prop tech space, and maybe I'll touch on that in a bit more detail when we chat. But yeah, we kind of grew that, and then again, I suppose, not necessarily got itchy feet, but again, kind of looking for that next challenge, and I suppose that's a common theme in terms of my career, is always kind of looking for a challenge. And moved to another startup, slightly different stage, called Just Move In, which is a home move setup service, so kind of takes away the admin element of moving house. And moved there, I suppose, I'm trying to remember when COVID was now. I think we all kind of forget, or tried to forget.
2021.
21. So I moved there in 20. I moved there in 20, and then obviously 21 came around, and it was kind of a really different situation. And I mean, that was it had a lot of challenges to it, because again, I think most of us had never been in that situation before, and kind of as a growing business, it has its own challenges, and then you kind of layer that on top, and it becomes even more challenging. But equally, it was an interesting time. But it also, like with most people, it gave us all an opportunity to reflect and kind of consider what was important, what those next moves were, and I suppose that was really the catalyst for me to go. I've always wanted to do my own thing. I think that's been fairly evident since I was in my teenage years, really, but never necessarily had the idea and kind of that confidence to be able to go out and do it on my own. But that kind of came about, and started Digihome really start of 22, I suppose. So and yeah, kind of been on that journey, and I can probably go into a lot more detail in terms of the last 18 months or so, and some of the things that we've been through.
Of course. What was your and thanks for that. And what was your position as co-founder? What was your main sort of area of responsibility in these previous startups? Or areas of responsibility, presumably more than one, right? This is usually the case.
So actually, with FixFlow, I wasn't a co-founder. So the two co-founders there, Duncan and Raj, I was essentially kind of number one employee, but for really the first year, it was just the three of us. And we, for the first 6 months, we were working in the basement of an estate agent who Raj knew, in a single breeze block basement with literally no heating. And we were literally all sat there with like heaters in between our legs during the day and drinking copious amounts of coffee just to stay warm and stay awake. But it was kind of, that's kind of the really nice raw element of startup.
That's why we do it, right?
Yeah, exactly. So it was like, it was a beautiful kind of first experience into startup, really, as opposed to, you can see some these days that are so well financed, they sort of like jump straight into like nicely plush air conditioned offices, but actually
they shouldn't be called startups.
Doing it the other way is so much more fun.
But
my roles there were essentially like sales and marketing, but as you can kind of expect, when there's the three of you, you kind of just all muck in and do your own thing. So it was predominantly driving the sales, and for me it was a totally new experience. I suppose insurance, for anyone that kind of doesn't really have much context in terms of insurance or the insurance market, you've essentially got brokers and underwriters, and brokers are kind of the client facing biz dev element, and then you've kind of got your underwriter who underwrites the risk. Now, I suppose within that kind of underwriter role, there's what's known as kind of new biz development underwriters, who I suppose are a little bit more commercially minded, I suppose is one way of explaining it, but do a lot more new business than existing business and renewals, and that was kind of my role. So I did kind of have some sales experience, but not necessarily kind of the go out into the big wide world and sell hard, because invariably with brokers you kind of always knew that there was business coming to you. What you really wanted to do is make sure that you were getting the right business to you that you could underwrite and underwrite competitively. So kind of going into sales role and going into a space that I really didn't know that much about. I mean, I was a homeowner. Okay, great. But it was kind of the rental space that we were focused on. I'd rented, but probably 10 years before that. So again, not necessarily my domain, but it was great. I absolutely loved kind of engrossing myself in the space, and I think that was one of the things that really set us out, was actually just how hard we worked to get to understand the problems of customers and to kind of position ourselves within the space as thought leaders. I mean, Raj, who was one of the co-founders and CEO, his background was law. Property law, and again, I suppose when it came to it, and we started to look at some of the regulatory changes that were happening within the space, that was obviously great because he had a knowledge and an experience there. But yeah, we worked really hard. We did, I think we did about 110 events in 1 year. Up and down the country, which kind of just gives a bit of insight into just how many kind of these events. And I mean, these range from kind of 10 people to 100 people or hundreds of people in a conference. But each one of those conversations was valuable to us in terms of like trying to understand what those pain points were, how we position it, how do we kind of evolve the product. And slowly but surely we started to eke away, and we found York as as kind of our first really growth city,
right?
Which was kind of strange. You think of all of the places where you're likely to start seeing some traction, and York doesn't necessarily jump to the top of the list, but it was, and we kind of then just used that as our as Geoffrey Moore would put it, kind of our little beachheads, and we started to work from there and kind of went to Leeds and Manchester and then kind of London and all of the other places. But yeah, slowly but surely grew, and over the kind of time that I was there, we grew it to about 18% of market, which in kind of a state agency, and again, just to give listeners context, there's a real long tail to a state agency. So you've got your really big guys like your Countrywide, your Connells, Leaders, Romans, and I'm sure I've forgotten a few, but just they're kind of names that most people will be synonymous with. But and then we've got a really long tail of very small independents who you don't necessarily come up in the first few pages of a Google search, and you've really got to work hard to find the people. So I think it was really impressive in terms of just our growth over a period of time. And like I said, I think over those sort of 5.5 years, it was a case of actually people, when they started to talk about how you report your repairs or how your tenants report repairs, it was kind of like fixed flow was almost like the word that people would say, and that was great. I mean, it was great. And we didn't really have too much in the way of competition. So yeah, it was a great time, and really enjoyed it. And then kind of Just Move In was at a slightly different stage when I joined. So they'd just done a funding round. I think there were about 10 employees at the time. And really looking to kind of scale and ramp up that business. And I think some of the nice things about that business was obviously Tom is one of the co-founders, Ross is the other one. They're a B Corp. I think they were kind of the first property B Corp. And again, it was nice. They were based down in Bournemouth. And it was a very different kind of atmosphere and environment within the office, and a different proposition as well. A lot more people were doing that kind of thing, but in a very different way to how Just Move In were doing it. Right. And it was good. We kind of we grew the business. We grew headcount quite significantly. So I think pre-COVID hit, we were kind of up to the 50 mark, if not a little bit more. So kind of over the course of the year, we grew 400% in terms of headcount. And then obviously COVID hit, and we all have we had a load of challenges around that. We were fortunate, I suppose, in a lot of ways compared to a lot of other sectors, that property was kind of left to stay open, and that helped us. But kind of the challenges of running a team remotely. We had a young team, so there was some real challenges there in terms of their environments, which again, kind of we really had to manage. And I think again, the kind of the founders there and the leadership team, we really kind of focused on how do we kind of make this make the best of that bad situation. So that kind of led me to start thinking about what I want to do on my own. I had a few ideas, had a few conversations with different people. Was originally kind of going to go down one route, and then had a conversation and kind of decided that maybe it wasn't the best route to go down. So kind of navigated my way over maybe 6 months of, I want to do something on my own, and I've got a kind of idea, but I wasn't necessarily set on that idea. And I suppose by the end of 6 months, a lot more concrete around that idea, or at least in my head, without really much more beyond that initial idea. So that kind of brought me into 22 and starting Digihome.
And what was the idea before? We'll get into what it is now in a second, but like, what was that like, that process of, having an idea and sort of going through it? What was it that people were saying? How were you going? Was this like something you were actively seeking for people to rip apart with friends and family? And that's why, or was it just happenstance that as you were sort of thinking about it and researching it, that you arrived eventually on what it is now?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, and I'm sure like other founders will have kind of different journeys and different ways that they've done this. I think with some founders that I speak to, it's kind of like they work in the same sector. They saw a very specific thing, and they were like, "Yes, we can absolutely do that." I suppose there was an element of that in my initial idea. So I suppose as part of being engrossed in property tech and the property market for a number of years, I was very aware of kind of the challenges with the home buying process, and that was kind of my initial area of focus, if you can call it that. I think the one thing that I was kind of conscious of was not kind of getting too pigeonholed on an idea at that stage, and also not trying to force it, because I was keen to do my own thing. And I think sometimes you can kind of be a bit blinkered or maybe a bit blind to actually, is it a good idea or not, just based on the fact that you want to do it, right? So the initial idea was focused on kind of home buying and trying to solve that. And I mean, obviously there are lots of people that are trying to solve that and have done for a long period of time and in different ways. I suppose on reflection, was mine any different to some of those? Maybe, maybe not. And I think it was kind of really working through, actually, okay, so there's a problem here. How do you solve it? And I think really what happened over the course of a few months was actually I realized it was really, really, really difficult to actually solve. And could it be solved in kind of the time frame that I was looking for? Maybe not. And I suppose to some extent I've maybe been proved a little bit right by the fact that actually not a lot's changed in the last kind of 2 or 3 years around the home buying process. Because speaking to people, there's so many different stakeholders as part of that process that it just became, it's not necessarily kind of a tech solution that's going to solve it. It's going to be lots of different factors and elements.
So it's almost like an infrastructure problem, basically, where it's operational across multiple stakeholders. So you wouldn't just be, it's not the kind of case you could just bring a solution. You need to affect change in lots of different industries and lots of different operations, right? Presumably.
Absolutely. And I think the kind of the takeaway that I had from working with estate agents and kind of those property professionals was things don't move quickly. And they all have their own agendas, and it's and you know, that's not, I'm not saying that that's a bad thing, but it does make compromise hard, and it does make getting those solutions hard. And invariably kind of the change that's happened in property has been because of regulation. And in some respects, it's not that much different to financial services in a lot of ways. Is kind of the regulatory element is always kind of the catalyst for the change. But yeah, it was. I think in terms of just that process, it was very relaxed. I didn't set myself kind of a time frame on it. But I suppose I wanted to get myself to a point that I was comfortable enough to say, right, let's leave kind of the comfort of the day job behind, let's and to some of the points that I made earlier in terms of that challenge and being ready for the kind of that next challenge, like have that kind of conviction and that confidence that you can do something here. It might not end up as quite that idea, and I think that's probably a nice segue into the next step, but it's kind of, at least you've kind of got a good starting point that you're confident enough to kind of move forward on.
Yeah, and before I ask the next question, I just want to sort of show my solidarity with this idea of always wanting the next challenge. I think I can definitely relate to that. Like I think that's a common thread with founders and entrepreneurs as a whole. It's just we don't like comfort too much after a while. Like, when things become easy, it's like, no, man, like give me something else. I know a lot of serial founders, let's say, who as soon as they scale a company or get it to a certain point of success, they just start twiddling their thumbs and they're like, I'm out. Give me the next thing. And I would definitely say that just in terms of reflecting, as I do a lot, like those early days of Fixed Flow were, I loved them. I loved I loved that sort of real raw grind, trying to work your way through it. And to some respects, when it became kind of the established business that it was, it became slightly less attractive, and maybe a small element of that motivation went from kind of the day-to-day, right? But I think life is way too short to kind of just be sitting on your hands and just letting life go by. Like totally.
There's more to life, right?
I have a theory on that as well. I think it comes down, there are certain people, and I think certain people are more inclined to this than others, but I think there are certain people that are attracted to just feeling useful, right? And I think unless you're being asked to solve a lot of problems, sometimes you can just feel like you're not useful. So as soon as there's a team in place that's tackling all the fires for you, and everything is running relatively well, suddenly you don't feel as useful, and so you want to go where you are. And if that means artificially creating a new scenario whereby there's lots of problems, then so be it. Right? Some people do that by creating drama. Some people do that by creating a business, and I would recommend the latter. But
for sure. And I think that it's a really interesting insight, because I think that I definitely reflect in terms of like my personal life, how I take a very different role, right? Which is the role of again, we're in the, not to feel kind of have an archaic view of this, but I always like to think of myself as kind of the protector of my family and the provider. And not to say that my wife isn't hugely successful and
of course.
an inspiration to me, but I do like that role of kind of having to make sure that things are there and that people are looked after. And it's that, do you prefer giving a present or do you prefer receiving it? It's like it's always giving.
Always giving, yeah.
And for me, the reason that I'm doing Digihome, or the reason that I kind of want to run my own business and have a successful business at that is to kind of get myself into a position where I can actually just dedicate myself to doing stuff for other people. Like that is kind of my end goal, is retire and just help people. That's what I kind of have as my vision of life, is just be able to do those things that you don't have to worry about the monetary side of things anymore. You can just help people for the sake of helping people, and I think that's hopefully I'll get there one day.
That's a great goal to have, and I agree with you. I see myself in the same way, and that's I think maybe why when people don't have purpose outside of their home, then they're looking to try and create problems at home to solve, right? So it's like but as I think it's definitely and I don't know for certain, but from my limited understanding of biology, it's definitely men seem to be more inclined to problem solving than women, and so it seems to be a trait that we're most attracted to, solving complex problems. But
I think my wife would probably disagree with you. She loves.
Well, and like I said, I mean, I think that's a generality thing. But and you're probably right. I'm probably very wrong in that. But it's just from what I've heard in biological literature, that's apparently the case. But anyway, aside from that, then let's talk about Digihome. What does it do?
Yeah. So
it's 26 minutes in, what does Digihome do?
We'll get there in the end. 1 minute and 59. What does it do? Okay. So I suppose if I take a step back, so started Digihome with the kind of view of being able to solve the folder of doom in everyone's home. So just to kind of explain that a little bit more, we all have our ways of storing and or not storing, as the case may be, like all of our household documents, whether it's kind of bills, your mortgage statements, whatever else. And we started off on a journey to solve that, because I spoke to a lot of people, and it's kind of one of those points that everyone resonates with, right? It's like, how do you store your stuff? Oh yeah, I've got the 4 lever arch folders, and basically something comes through the post and I just stick it in there, and it's kind of poorly managed. And ultimately what that doesn't enable the homeowner or the household to do is kind of use the information and the data on there to better inform how they run their home. Like, we're all kind of familiar with the additional cost of auto renewing, or not knowing what subscriptions you've got in your household. I can be guilty of that. My wife and I realized we both had Prime subscriptions not that long ago, and it's kind of like hugely frustrating to kind of think that you're that disorganized that you didn't realize that, or clearly we don't speak enough.
That's a good point. I need to ask if my wife's got.
Actually, but it's so we went out on a mission to kind of solve that, and again, like I say, the feedback was it's a problem that people resonated with, and to some extent people wanted to solve. So we kind of built a wireframe prototype. We kind of did some early user testing, and then we started to build the product. Now, we've made lots of mistakes on our way to this specific point, as most founders will probably admit to, and some I kind of reflect and go, I definitely shouldn't have made them, but you kind of learn from these things. But we were also having some really interesting conversations with some very big companies, and I think one of the learnings that I would definitely take from kind of the last 18 months is not to get too distracted by them, because those, whilst you can get very excited about, wow, we're having these conversations and we're a startup. I mean, at this stage, we were kind of pre-product, pre-investment. Like we were nothing really opposed from an idea and kind of some wireframes. But to be having the kind of conversations that we're having with like big insurance companies and others that were kind of looking at the proposition as a way of how do we engage better with our customers and how do we kind of add value into their everyday lives. And to some extent we got distracted by those. I think we started to build a product that was too cumbersome, had too much in it. We built across multiple platforms, iOS and Android. So like lots of kind of, I suppose, not fundamental mistakes, because I think we made all of the right decision, or we made the decisions for the right reasons. And you know, I suppose it's kind of that difference between sometimes knowledge and wisdom as to which ones you do and which ones you don't. So we were having these conversations which were all like super exciting, and we're kind of going, oh my god, like, you know, and we were getting introduced to others and we're like, wow, this is really like, this has huge potential, right? And so we got to October of last year. We still hadn't launched the product, like, and I suppose just to add, we used a dev agency or an outsourced dev function for what we did, and again to take lots of learnings away from that. But it wasn't working particularly well in terms of the relationship. In terms of our product development, we were kind of really finding ourselves struggling to get an MVP out, and I kind of, you know, that was the real key goal, was to get it out there, learn, and to iterate and evolve the proposition. But every single month we thought we were going to get something out, something happened next month, and it on and on and on. We managed to launch the MVP in November of last year. And I suppose within kind of not necessarily the best time to kind of launch an MVP, which is coming into the Christmas period, and you know, especially when it kind of comes to home admin. But nevertheless, we kind of started to get some users, started to get some feedback and some data. And I suppose over the course, when Christmas came around, we had some analytics that we could start to explore and understand a bit better in terms of what was working, what wasn't working. And I think it was clear that there were some elements of the app that were working that people were interested in, and that kind of coupled with some of our social activity and other bits and pieces was kind of reaffirmed that. And then there were other elements that just weren't. They were kind of semi-redundant. And I really took like Christmas and New Year to reflect in terms of, right, what are we doing here? Like, are we solving the right problem? Are we solving it in the right way? Can we solve it in the right way? And kind of asking all of the questions that, you know, I suppose you, in some respects, you kind of ask at the start, but you also have to keep on asking yourself as you go through this whole process. And I think the answer, the answer to that question was no, probably not. Based on what we'd seen from like early user engagement and feedback, but equally it gave us some insight as to actually maybe the problem, like what the problem was that we should be solving. And it wasn't that far away from where we were, but equally it kind of meant that we had to refocus and essentially pivot a little bit. So kind of made the decision at the end of January that's what we were going to do. In this current, you know, current investment landscape an environment that we find ourselves in, it's, you know, it's hard. You need the kind of benchmark for any kind of raise at the moment is a lot higher than it was 2-3 years ago. So we kind of had to make that decision as to, right, we either kind of call it a day and we kind of we made the wrong, like we didn't make the right decision, we didn't make the right product, whatever, however you want to look at it, or actually we refocus, we pivot, we kind of then really focus our attention in terms of what it is that we're doing moving forward, and what does that product look like how do we with a kind of limited runway, limited capital, a dev team that isn't working well for us right now, change that. So we got rid of the dev team. we looked at the product and kind of spent probably another couple of months really trying to figure out what that looked like, what the scope was, how we could kind of amend what we'd done. So not throw away everything that we'd done, because I think that would have been probably been a stretch too far. But like, how do we kind of use what we've done in a slightly different way? And yeah, so we kind of, for the last 4 or 5 months, been on that journey of scoping the new app, going through the process of getting it built or getting the changes made, and we're, I'd say, probably a couple of weeks away from hopefully being in that position where we, I suppose, relaunch is the best way of putting it, and we kind of go out again. So that's kind of the journey, and I probably haven't really answered the question, which is what it is. So essentially what it is the problem that we're solving is that as a homeowner or as a household, you're not taught how to manage a home effectively. It's one of those things that we all aspire to be homeowners or to kind of have our own place, but unless you've kind of got that sage of wisdom, whether it's your parents that kind of pass down all of that information, that's few and far between, you're kind of left pretty clueless as to actually what I should be doing. And ultimately, you know, if you're not organized around it, you're probably going to be making mistakes and costing yourself money. And I think the other way to look at it is, with the cost of living crisis that we're still very much kind of experiencing, I reflected on it, and it's like, in days gone by, when we were looking to save money within our household, we'd look at like how you'd save on your services. You know, you'd switch your energy provider from one to another and get a cheaper deal. You'd do the same with your broadband and your insurance and everything else. But the reality of it is that kind of activity is now gone, right? Like, we couldn't switch our energy. We still can't really. I mean, there's some ways, but you can fix it, but it's not necessarily going to be cheaper for you in the long run. Insurance prices are going up, like broadband prices are going up. So it's like, how do you as a homeowner get better control of your costs? And I think definitely over the last couple of years, for me personally, it's kind of like, especially with that kind of lack of financial income that I've been used to over years, it's like that unexpected cost, that small issue that turns into a big problem, plays on your mind so much more. And I was kind of like, this, you know, there are things that you can be doing to protect yourself and to prevent these things from happening, but unless you know about them and kind of are aware of the context around them, and I think that's a really important part, kind of that education of like, yeah, do this, but here's the reasons why. It's not just a case of someone telling to you do it. It's like, you know, it's the fact of do it, and you know, this will extend it by X or reduce the chances of it breaking down by Y. So I think there was a real opportunity there to kind of help homeowners, predominantly kind of younger homeowners, so that those first-time homeowners or potentially slightly inexperienced. But I mean, you know, looking back at having been a homeowner myself now for kind of 16, 17 years, I'm still learning and I'm still making mistakes, and I kind of look back and go, God, I wish I'd had this like in 15 years ago.
Yeah.
Because there is just so much complexity to it, and we're not kind of talking about like really granular stuff. It's kind of basic stuff. It's like, how do you look after and maintain your appliances? What are the kind of checks that you should be kind of doing on your home? How are the, you know, when are your kind of key utility services, meter readings, insurances? You know, how do you kind of prevent the risk that costs you money, essentially? So what the app does is it essentially takes some very basic information about your property, and it creates like a preventative maintenance plan for your home. And then you can kind of personalize that even further. It will offer you suggestions around, you know, what you can add to your to-do list. And so it gives you then the mechanism of how you manage that. So it tells you, I suppose, to break it down, tells you what you need to do, when you need to do it. It offers you help around how to do it if you're kind of unclear around that. And we've also just started to explore do it for me. So kind of, I don't want to do it, but surely you know someone that can. So kind of that ecosystem of trusted services, really. And I suppose just to add to a couple of other elements, which is when it comes to running a home, it's essentially for the vast majority of households, and this kind of comes from conversations with homeowners, is it's a fairly siloed responsibility. So more often than not, one person within that household takes either sole responsibility or does the majority of things. And again, invariably that falls on the female if it's kind of a family household. And that kind of mental load, mental well-being is really, like, again, I think something that over the last few years has become a lot more people have become a lot more aware of kind of the impact of having to try and remember all of these things. And thinking of when was the last time I did that, when do I need to do that? It's kind of trying to get all of that out of your head onto an app that kind of helps you manage that. And by managing that, you're doing it better, you're saving money, you're saving stress, and also kind of an underlying element is also you're saving the planet, because again, if we can kind of extend the lifetime of appliances, if we can get you if we can help you save on your energy consumptions, all of those things, bearing in mind that households are kind of a massive contributor to carbon emissions, about 20% of all carbon emissions in the UK, and then actually appliances is a pretty big chunk as well, or manufacture of them. Then kind of there's another benefit there, but we kind of I think there's a lot of and again, not to kind of cast wild dispersions, but there's a lot of greenwashing that goes on, and kind of we don't see that as kind of the primary objective of the app. It's kind of I suppose a nice to have,
like a side effect almost.
Exactly.
Yeah. But it's interesting because as soon as you started explaining the products, I remember when we first spoke, something came to mind which you just touched on there, which is the well-being element of it, which I think is not to be sniffed at or underappreciated for the reasons you mentioned. Like it's like running a business, running a household, right? I mean, there's many aspects to it, and it's something that isn't really talked about a huge amount. It sort of bubbles up in stress levels, it bubbles up in anxiety and so on. But there's very much an expectation, and maybe rightly or wrongly, that as an adult, well, that's just being an adult, just deal with it, But like you pointed out, if you go to a job, you're taught how to do the job. You're not really taught how to do this. Like, your drips and drabs, maybe. Like, I was taught how to cook and clean by my mum, and you're given little elements of it, but no one's really giving you the full picture. Like, this is how to do it all, coherently and in a way that isn't stressful. And whereas as a leader, you're generally taught how to manage things as a whole, in a way that is constructive and ideally in a less stressful way, right?
Exactly. So you think of kind of from the business perspective, just how many different like tech solutions there are out there, right, to help you organize your day, and from Zoom through to Monday, through to Miro, through to Trello, whatever it is.
There's plenty.
There's plenty, right?
Yeah. My company is a B2B SaaS company, so I'm just as guilty of adding to the noise there.
Just one more to the tech stack.
It's one fine. More, yeah.
But it's all right. It's integrated, so it's fine.
But that's it. And you can make a budget for it, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. But yeah, it's like there definitely was something missing when we were speaking to people, whether people were kind of like bastardizing an existing kind of, whether it was an Excel spreadsheet or like a to-do app, but it wasn't very specific, and it didn't kind of proactively help somebody in terms of actually doing the things and giving them kind of the context around it. Because I think, it's one thing to kind of tell someone to do something. It's even better if you're kind of educating them as to the reason why. And, ultimately that's kind of, this is where Digihome is right now, is kind of just the first step. Our ultimate vision for this, and we've kind of looked at this a slightly different way to a lot of people before, is kind of, we want to make this into a home insurance product. So
if you are enjoying this episode, please subscribe, like, and share your thoughts in the comments.
So the idea being is that in the same way as you've got Vitality and U-Life for life insurance, which essentially provide you with a mechanism to live better and ultimately then reward you for that through your insurance, we see this in exactly the same way for the home. And
almost
again,
like giving a score almost as to how efficiently you're able to manage a home and the sort of associate risk with that is
yeah.
yeah.
And I think it's really important, the risk element. So I suppose putting my insurance hat back on.
Yeah, I can see that was slowly coming on. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the weird thing is this kind of is just an amalgamation of my last 20 years of my career in some weird bastardized way. But if you look at, and it has to be about the risk, because I think, again, it's very easy to kind of gamify these things without there kind of necessarily being a benefit to them. So I think when it comes to how you manage and protect the home, there's kind of an underlying element, which is risk. And actually, if you kind of look at home insurance claims, and again, I could talk for hours about this, but about 51% of home insurance claims can be prevented. Now, that's not to say that you are going to be preventing 51% of claims. I definitely wouldn't go out on a limb and say that using Digihome will do that, but there are certain things within there that you can start to mitigate risk and start to offer greater protection around a potential loss.
So things like maintaining appliances correctly, ensuring the property in general is well kept, things like, because presumably a lot of claims come from malfunction of appliances and things like that, right?
Yeah. So the biggest kind of I'm trying to think of the best word here, but the biggest cause of that of claims is water damage. So that can be that can be anything from someone forgetting to turn off the bath. Okay, how do you prevent that? Very difficult unless you've kind of got leak detection or something, which again I don't even know whether that would actually work on reflection, but or simple things like knowing where your stopcock is and checking that you can turn it off is kind of a way of mitigating a loss through to, yes, as you say, like maintaining your appliances and dishwashers, washing machines. All of these things clearly have a risk associated to them. Making sure that you kind of turning off your water when you go away on holiday, clearing your gutters so that, again, there's less chance after heavy rainfall that you're likely to get a blocked drain or damp or water ingress. So there's lots of different things that kind of there's no silver bullet, but there's lots of things that you can do from an insurance perspective that kind of work towards reducing the risk of that. And equally, you've got to argue that actually there's a behavioural element here as well, which is if somebody is maintaining and looking after their home, and again, I know that I don't have any specific research to kind of argue this one way or the other, but does that make them a better moral risk and less likely to fraudulently claim? That's kind of slightly aside, but the point being is, coming back to kind of the home and the property and the physical element there, then there's definitely stuff that kind of from an insurance perspective feeds into that, as well as kind of the more general, like, cleaning, care of things that you can do that both kind of improve those to an extent, but also from a well-being perspective and other elements also come into play.
So like at this point in time, so that's the long play, but at this point in time, it's something of like a digital, or will be like a digital assistant to some degree, to help you with reminding you when these things are due to be done. And I assume maybe like store the documents, maybe scans of documents, things like that. Is that right? So you're still keeping that element of the filing cabinet side of things associated with it as well?
Exactly that, Greg. So I think I suppose rather than assistant, I kind of see it as more of a companion kind of relationship, right? Which is kind of someone there to help you grow and develop as kind of a homeowner.
Yeah.
And I think that, I suppose, whilst that's kind of the big vision, and again, we've kind of looked at the space, and there have been we're not the first people to think about this. And in fact, when you talk to people about home insurance, preventative insurance and preventing risk has always been discussed. And there have been propositions around this, but invariably what's happened is that they've built an insurance product and then tried to do something off the back of it.
Right.
We're essentially trying to reverse engineer that, because I think the important thing here is to get the user, the household, engaged in the activity of managing the home.
It's got to actually be useful as a product first and integrated into someone's life, create that lock-in effect before you can ever make any data extraction from that, right?
Exactly, because then I think the kind of what you hope over a period of time is people become more knowledgeable, they understand these things, it becomes habit, but then kind of the insurance is there as kind of the thing that underpins all of that and keeps that kind of customer lifetime value. I mean, if we start talking about things that are kind of important to the business, it's kind of how do you kind of retain that customer once they've got a sufficient amount of knowledge that they kind of do it themselves, is then actually how do you then build that value in there? And we see insurance as a service and not as a product. I think for most people, insurance as a product doesn't work, right? So 91% of policyholders don't claim. They don't hear from their insurer. There's no value there. I mean, yes, okay, you can argue there's a peace of mind, but you pay a premium for that peace of mind. Whereas actually, I think insurance has a real opportunity to actually become a much more fundamental part of a household and of a policyholder's life, and that goes from it goes a step beyond kind of your free cinema tickets when you buy insurance through a comparison website. And there's regulation, we touched on regulation earlier, like there's regulation that is it's kind of a catalyst for change. So consumer duty, which is really a massive piece of regulation when you kind of look at it, which is kind of, as I coin it, it's kind of knowing your customer, but on steroids, which is much more insurance companies having to understand that their insurance product is the right insurance product for that customer. Now, how do you do that when you don't really engage or have any kind of conversation or know your customer in any way is very challenging. And I think, a lot of the incumbent insurers are really struggling with that, because there is a lack of there's an underlying lack of trust when it comes to consumers and insurance companies. And so kind of looking at how you can become a bit more integrated in terms of helping that household in their everyday life and making their home life better. Well, actually, I think that's kind of a step in the right direction. And definitely from kind of the conversations that we've had in that insurtech insurance space, I think that is ultimately where the sector will go. So hopefully, we're at the cutting edge of that with this, and we'll see where we go.
Well, I can tell you categorically that once you release on Android, I will be the first to download the product, because I don't use an iPhone. But yeah, because 100%, this is exactly the kind of thing I would need. Because I've tried all kinds of solutions, like you alluded to a moment ago about the different sort of solutions for households that are available. It's very much a mishmash of things. You're trying calendars or spreadsheets or Miro or whatever you can. Even Google Assistant and Alexa and these kinds of things. They don't quite. None of these things really cut it. And even if they do work individually, they are individual. They can't speak to one another, and so you're left in some ways feeling more anxious. And that's currently what I do. And it does just make me feel more anxious that I've forgotten to look at that spreadsheet or forgotten to update this. And so, using all these things, yes, it works to a degree, but having one place to do all these things, I would undoubtedly use. Like my partner and I both would. And then, and also I'm thinking as well from the perspective of passing on that information, like thinking to my son about how to run a home. That's something I think about a lot, about not only how to deal with the world, but how to run a home. That's why I, teach them to cook and the importance of cleaning. And we all do that with our kids. But then if you also can say, when you're older, you can use this app, that feels a little bit like nicer in some weird way. I mean, I embrace technology. I'm a technologist, so of course I do. But I feel a little bit more at ease knowing that there's going to be a solution to look after my children in that way too,
Absolutely, and I think look at it in a slightly different way, which is also if you can kind of demonstrate that you've looked after and you've maintained your home in the right way when you're selling it, then again it becomes a slightly
That's interesting. So what are you saying that you could potentially produce some sort of like selling report, a new buyer report potentially, to be like, look, this is an app that we used. I mean, that would create a good sense of virality as well, because then anyone selling would probably onboard another new potential user.
Exactly that. So I mean, there's a property logbooks is what they're kind of what they're called at the moment. They are called, which is kind of that idea. And I think we kind of looked at it and said, well, it's fine kind of having that initial dump of data, from a property, but the real value in the data is kind of it being real time and updated. And I think with a lot of solutions, and again, I'm not kind of casting any dispersions here, but with a lot of them, that data becomes redundant. And then where's the value in that? So actually, it has to become part of routine and everyday life in order for that value in 5, 10, 15. I mean, most of us are keeping, I think the average time that we now spend in our homes is 20 years before we sell them. So it's a long time to keep things updated. So yeah, I definitely think that there's an opportunity there for us. And I think it comes back to, how do we help homeowners? And this isn't just about homeowners as well, because I think as well there's an opportunity in terms of that education piece from renter into homeowner, because a lot of people kind of aspire to that. How do we help to start educating people around that? Because if I look at it at the other end of the spectrum, and I see some of the great work that Crisis and Shelter do when people don't get it right, and this is sometimes it's very simply a case of something breaks down and they can't afford to pay it, and then from the financial perspective, it kind of snowballs into they're homeless. And so how do we kind of try and bring down the cost of running a home, first of all, but then how do we kind of protect people as well, that they don't fall off the end and become homeless? Because in this, for a country like England and the UK to have the homelessness problem that we have is just it's ridiculous. And it really, I think it's absolutely tragic. I mean, I've got as a slightly personal story, there's a guy called Terry who's homeless near where I live. I've known him for about 10 years, and he's a lovely guy. But he's really struggled through, and he used to work for the Greek police. So he's not a stupid guy. He's intelligent. You always have a conversation with him. He has his own demons, but that's aside from the point. But just kind of having that support, or at least kind of helping to try and mitigate some of those factors that do cause that, I think is really important. From all the way from kind of social housing, people understanding that element of it, all the way through to kind of more affluent homeowners who just probably time poor when it comes to trying to manage it, or
busy professionals,
not very good at communicating it. It's whatever it is. So there's a real spectrum there, and not to say that we're kind of trying to be all things to all people, but I think there's definitely elements within what we're trying to do that would resonate with different elements along the way.
And you mentioned the renting market there briefly. Like, is there a version of this that you see that could be useful for landlords and as well, like in terms of, obviously in a rental property, the vast majority, or at least some of the responsibilities of the home maintenance fall then onto the landlord. So is there maybe a version of it that's kind of like, for renters and for landlords, and maybe could be quite useful for landlords to be able to see the track record, say, of how these new tenants were in their last property, what kind of jobs that they did to keep the property up to date, that kind of thing? Or do you not want to get too pulled far away from that? You want to stick with the kind of more holistic homeowner approach?
I definitely think that there is a version of what we do that would would work in the rental space. How it works, again, I think there's various ways to do that, and I think sometimes with the rental market being as kind of competitive it is at the moment, do you want to kind of add another competitive element in on whether somebody kind of maintain their appliances or not, as to whether they get a property or not? I think you're probably on a bit of a slippery slope there. That said, if you're a landlord and you give your tenants this tool and you kind of say, well, look, you look after it, because actually there's probably a benefit to me in terms of whether it extends their lifetime by a couple of years, or it means that I don't have to pay for a emergency call out or a breakdown or a new appliance, whatever it is, then actually there's a benefit there. So actually, can landlords then use it as a way of incentivizing their tenants to look after the property better? Now, I haven't spoken to enough landlords to know whether that would resonate, and I've not spoken to enough tenants to know whether that's something that they'd be interested in. But definitely, when you're that kind of tenant that's thinking about, well, this I'm renting at the moment, but I want to own my own home at some point, and kind of learning some of those skills and building that kind of knowledge and understanding at that stage is going to be beneficial to you when you do eventually become a homeowner. And likewise, I think from a landlord's perspective, there's a benefit there as well. So yeah, I suppose it's definitely one that we've got within the roadmap and within our kind of scope of what we can do with the product. I think initially where we are, very much focused on kind of the homeowner and that household environment, but yeah, definitely one for the future for sure.
That's the thing though, isn't it? When you're in the positions that we're in, it's very easy to start seeing all different things that you can be doing, right? And and that's the most difficult aspect of entrepreneurialism or being a founder, is trying to keep you just maintaining focus on the given moment and being like, no, yes, we could do that, but let's focus on this problem first. We can tackle the other 1,000 another day, as well as all the other aspirations of like you said, what your eventual goal is in life. To just be patient and be like, I'll get there, we'll get there, I'll have the opportunity to tackle that problem eventually, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm as guilty as any, and I think again, when you kind of look at I suppose when you look at like the home and property, it's just so vast in terms of the different avenues that you can go down, and like I think we've been guilty about probably trying to do too much too early, and which is why really this year we've very much kind of focused on how do we help people with a better way of managing the home and focus purely on that, because what
was it looking like before then? Because you already went through that iteration from last year to this year, and then like you said, this now newer focus. So what was it looking like at the beginning of the year?
So it was kind of we initially, so I suppose in terms of the process, we kind of focused initially on document capture, which would then facilitate data, which then led into to-dos, if that kind of makes. So it was very much around how do we get that folder of doom onto the app, and then kind of create the story beyond that, using data to kind of inform how to do that better. The challenge, like to be quite transparent, I think the challenge is that one, it's getting that documentation on there. I mean, in an ideal world, we would have had APIs into every kind of supplier, and then you can kind of just pull down the information, as opposed to the expectation of somebody having to upload it themselves. In terms of the upload, again, we built some proprietary technology to kind of sit on top of OCR, so essentially image recognition. So what we wanted to do was be able to pull out information from documents and then kind of use that to then personalize the experience beyond. I suppose that's it sounds a lot easier than it actually is, and especially when you start to go down that rabbit hole, which is, for example, with home insurance, you've probably got about 30 different suppliers with different wordings and different like definitions of things. It becomes very, very hard to do that. So you kind of then you're working off a machine learning element. You're then sort of like layering in neurolinguistics to start to understand the language within a document. And it kind of we went quite far with this, but I think coming back to kind of the original problem, which is getting people to do that, getting people to actually take an image of it was a challenge. People are time poor. I think people are quite skeptical around sharing vast amounts of personal information, and despite the fact that people have got this personal information stored in lever arch folders, and the security on your phone is 100 times more secure than that. There is kind of that mentality piece to get over, which again we definitely did to an extent, but not in a sufficient capacity in order to kind of make it work.
I suppose it always comes down to this idea of the time frame between engaging with something for the first time and then receiving value, right? Whereas and if I'm understanding correctly, like this version of the platform would have probably been like quite a lot of an onboarding process essentially. Before then, they would have started seeing something from it. You have to feed it a lot of information first until you get something from it. Whereas now, it sounds a lot more like you can just open it and immediately, with very little information to begin with, you can start getting something. So then you're incentivized to give it more, which then gives you more back. And is that a fair sort of assessment of the decision?
Absolutely. I think that's a really really fair assessment, that it's one, you've got to kind of have the mechanisms to make it super easy, right? Because no one's going to create that value as quickly as possible for the user. And I think there were probably two of the challenges which we had with the first version.
Because everyone's got like 1,000 apps on their phone, right? And so it's just you're competing not just with, and this is something I think that's forgotten a lot about when it comes to app development or software development as a whole, is you're not just competing with your direct competitors, you're competing with everything on the market, right? Because if I'm going to sit down and engage in an app, it needs to offer me something that is going to make me re-engage with it. And so if you're first downloading something to have a play, having a play is like that key moment, isn't it? It's like, okay, I wonder what this can do. Oh, okay, it does that. Oh, okay, it does that. Whereas if it's just like, oh, it's asking me to do this and it's asking me to do that, and then it's just suddenly like you're just suddenly thinking, I've got a lot of work to do now, as opposed to this is going to help me, which it might do, but that's just not what you're thinking, right?
Yeah, and I mean, it's look, I prior to Digihome, I'd never developed an app, so kind of pretty steep learning curve around this, and again, I think made sufficient mistakes along the way to kind of know how to do it better next time around. But yeah, exactly that, and I think there's some of the issues and some of the challenges that we've sought to overcome with the next version, which is kind of like how do you create that value quickly? How do you try and get that engagement so that somebody's landing into your app, they can automatically see that, and they can kind of start to build that personalization. And I think as well, it's around it is around trying to create a personalized experience, right? Like I think most of us these days are kind of done with generic and done with kind of it doesn't really work for me in that way. And I think having something that's a lot more or more tailored to that specific user is, I think, it also important when it comes to like delivering an experience that people are more inclined to put a bit more effort into along the way, because it's more personalized, because it's tailored to them, because it kind of will develop something better for them in the long term.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is going to be really, really random, right? Just completely off topic. But has anyone ever told you look a bit like the actor? Oh God, what's his name?
I know who you're going to say.
Yeah.
Hold on. I'm going to write it down.
Okay, you write it down. I'm going to Google it. I should know his name.
Okay. Let's see
I literally just remembered it as soon as I hit enter. Gary Oldman.
No, that wasn't who.
Okay. But there is another one as well. Okay. maybe this is the other one, and I've forgotten his name too. I'm pretty good with actors' names, and I can't remember it now.
This podcast is digressing very quickly.
This is exactly the whole point of this podcast.
This is great, right? This is like a game of This is like a game of Guess Who.
This is exactly what this podcast is all about. Where is it? I can't remember his name. Okay, well, I can't remember his name. But okay. The actor from Limitless.
Yeah, Bradley Cooper.
Bradley Cooper, that's it. Yeah. Oh, that's who you had. Okay.
Yeah. So
Bradley Cooper. There we go. Yeah. Good. Yeah. So you get that a lot then.
I've had it a few times. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, there's definitely a lot worse people that you could be called. So
hell yeah, like Gary Oldman.
Yeah, like Gary, yeah.
But just to be clear, a young Gary.
A young
Oldman.
one.
Yeah. You reminded me of Gary Oldman at one point while we were talking from Fifth Element. I don't know if you remember that.
Okay.
Yeah. Not because he's evil in that. Not because you're evil, like an evil genius, but more just the facial expression and so on. So it's a compliment because he's an amazing actor.
No, thank you. If only I could build apps as well as he acts, then I'd be onto a winner.
Well, look, I mean, I'm sure he had to learn as well through the process, right?
Yeah.
So, and now he's a master at it. So,
and I think it's always important to remember that, right? Which is
really the way you brought it back to this, by the way. Yeah. I appreciate that. It was very good. Thank you.
That's all right. It's not my first rodeo.
Yeah. Talking to lunatics is not your first one. Yeah.
But no, it's like I think it is really important to remember that you do make mistakes and to sometimes not be. I mean, I'm my own worst critic.
Right. Don't be too hard on yourself. You've got
to realise that you're not going to get it right all the time, and as long as you're kind of making sure that you're making the best decisions for the right reasons with the right information, that's all you can do. Right. I mean, I remember my dad telling me very early on in my life, you can only do your best, which is kind of like, I mean, it's kind of you can be skeptical about it, but it's true. Like, as long as you're doing your best, there's nothing else that you can do, and you can't kind of look back and criticize yourself for making a mistake or making a decision where it doesn't work out how you expect it to, if you've kind of gone by those benchmarks. So
there's always a couple of themes that come up in a lot of these episodes, around things like ego, self-awareness, not taking things too seriously, not being married to your ideas, finding balance. These themes always come up inevitably in conversations with founders, and I'm struck by the assumed amount of self-awareness and ability to not be so married to your idea, to be able to look at it and, yes, while it might hurt, to say, okay, well, this thing isn't working, to let go of that emotionally and just go, well, we need to go this way. And that's quite a difficult thing to do. And I would argue that is ultimately the thing that separates successful founders, if whatever that it is, but successful founders from non-successful founders, is because the vast majority of time, when we hear the statistics about startups failing, I'm on record of saying this numerous times, that isn't really the case. Startups don't fail. Founders give up. Right? That's ultimately usually what it is. Like, there's some that isn't the case. They fail financially, but the vast majority, it's because they give up, because they're faced with this sort of adversity where they've been very certain that this is the direction we should go in. We do it, and they're not resilient enough, or don't have the flexibility enough from their initial idea, because they're so married to it, to move into that direction, to roll with the punches, to take that feedback, take it on the chin, and keep going. So it's a very admirable thing, and going to serve you in very good stead moving forward.
No, thank you. And I think I've learned a lot from this experience. Like, I kind of reflect and go, every single role that I've taken from when I first started my career, I've tried to be a better version of myself. And what I would say is, kind of, these last 2.5 years have been an acceleration of that to the nth degree, because it really does put you in kind of the cold face of a lot of things, and you do have to there's nowhere else to go. You have to kind of have that honesty with yourself in terms of where your shortcomings are. And I don't get me wrong, I have plenty, and I think it's there's lots of things that I still want to improve on as I get older. I do think as well that I'm in my early 40s now, and I've got a different perception than the one that I had 10-15 years ago, for sure. Life does that to you.
Of course.
It
would be very worrying if you had the same perception.
I don't know. I've got mates that probably do think exactly the same way as they did 15 years ago. Yeah. But I won't go into any more detail on that.
What are their names? Where do they live?
Yeah, I was about to say, just in case I cause some issues there.
Ex mates.
Yeah. But equally, like I had my daughter, my first child last year. That's been an absolute thank you. That's been an absolute game changer as well for me. So life has kind of taught me, and I've tried to take those learnings into business, and vice versa as well, right? Like, yes, they are different parts of my life, but you should still take the learnings from both and kind of use them in each environment.
It's one of those things, isn't it? I don't know about you, but I often wish to myself, like, while I don't regret anything that's occurred throughout my life because of, well, I regret some things, but but in terms of who it's made me as a person, to all the points you just made, I do sometimes wish I could sort of just have a quick one brief word with the 20-year-old version of myself to just say, don't worry, you'll get there. Like, you're going to learn this stuff. It's just going to happen because of, essentially, like you pointed out, it does just happen to you, right? You do need to make certain things happen, but you will learn these things as long as you're open to them and you're listening and you're paying attention. Like, you will learn these things. It just takes time,
Yeah, I think you touch on a really important thing there. It's about being open and listening, right?
Right.
I think that's the absolutely critical thing there, which is, and again, I've seen it it touches on your point earlier, not being too wedded to your idea. Being able to see kind of the woods through the tree. It's having a slightly different perspective, and I think that's kind of important, that you are always taking on that kind of learning, that feedback, and digesting it. And I think lots of people expect you to, I don't know, in my experience, there's been lots of times where I think people expect you to give an instant reaction to something, and actually it's much better to kind of listen, reflect, and then answer. And I think that's something that I've got better at as I've got slightly older, is feeling less inclined to kind of say something immediately, and actually kind of just taking a bit more time to be thoughtful about it.
And that's wisdom. That's what wisdom gives you, I think. That ability to because you realize it's not about wanting to please people in the moment. It's about the long-term effect of what it is that you're going to say. Yes, you can seem smart and you can seem helpful by answering immediately, but actually the long-term effect of what you say is far more impactful, for the person that you're giving that advice to, or saying, giving that direction to, or whatever it might be. But also the other side of it as well, I think, is, why I'd like to speak to my 20-something-old self as well, is because, at that age, late teenage, early 20s, the cusp of real adulthood, I guess, like there's a real challenge when it comes to identity, and most people have this, if not everyone has this. And identity doesn't really, I don't believe, start seeming clear until you're in your mid to late 30s, early 40s. Like, you as you become a parent, as you become a homeowner, as you become a business owner, or confident in your career or education, whatever it is you choose to do. That's what I mean by when I want to say to them as well. Like, as well as the other things we talked about. It's just like, it will come. Don't worry, it will come. You don't need to know exactly what you are, because the truth is you never know exactly what you are. Like, it's constantly changing, and you need to get comfortable with that,
Yeah, I think it's a really good point. Like, it does change, right? Like, there is so many unexpected.
Well, 2 years ago, you were a business owner and a husband, and now you're a business owner, a husband, and a father, and these things change, and one day maybe a grandfather, and so elements. No, not allowed.
No one's going to be good enough for her. No, these ages.
Yeah.
But yeah,
I forgot you've got a daughter, so it's never. She's not allowed.
I have pictures. I don't know. It's in what's the film? Bad Boys 2.
Oh yeah,
where the boyfriend turns up at the door and they literally pull out the shotgun. I can kind of, over the next few years, it's my goal to get a shotgun license just so I can play that role.
Or become a police officer. That's the other way to replicate that.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, I think I'll probably stick with the first one, to be honest.
Fair enough.
But yeah, no, there is so much unexpected in life, and I think as well, you have to get the most out of life. Life is too short. I mean, I know it sounds like a massive cliche, but it really is. And I think you kind of have to be open to different experiences and trying different things, and not being too much in a rush sometimes. Like I can remember in my early career, like I was in a rush to do everything. And I think, on reflection, I wish I'd stayed at companies a bit longer. I wish I'd probably tried something a little bit different. And sometimes you can be a little bit too overeager to do something. And I think that's probably, you can argue that with startups as well, right? It's like sometimes you can just be a little bit too quick to go to market, or a little bit too quick with an idea. And sometimes spending a little bit more time and going out to do that is maybe the better approach. In other times it might not be, but I think it's always.
I think that's the misunderstanding of a lot of people have of the literature around startups, of moving fast and breaking things, right? I think there's a lot of a misunderstanding around that, because I think there's a difference between being patient and being passive, right? There's a huge difference there. Being patient doesn't mean you sit around doing nothing. Like you said, you wish maybe you'd spend a bit more time in a certain job or something like that. The reason why jobs get boring is people aren't being proactive, right? You need to make opportunities, and it's exactly the same in business. Yes, you could say move fast. Okay, that doesn't necessarily mean build a product before anyone's given you feedback, but it does mean when you've got a product, get it in people's hands quickly. So it's like be proactive, or find out what people want quickly so you can build the product quicker. So I think there's a huge difference between just being passive in life and being patient. I think although it sounds something of a contradiction to be proactive and patient, I think they're very important things that you need to somehow find a balance between.
Yeah, I saw, weirdly, I just got it stuck in my head as on LinkedIn earlier, and there was a post which is, and it resonated with me, because again, it was another one of those things that my dad said to me when I was a kid, which is like, there's no such word as can't. And the post was very much like, I can't, and actually the kind of repositioning of that is, how can I? And I think it's, it's that position of like, to your point, is you're in a job, I can't get excited about this, or I can't progress, or I can't do that. It's like, how can I? And then kind of looking at, right, how can I do that? And I think
how can I get excited about
this?
Yeah, exactly. How can I get motivated? Because the responsibility ultimately falls on us. It falls on you as the individual. It's very easy to be like, well, I'm not enjoying this job because my boss is an asshole, because my colleagues are horrible, or the job is boring. It's like, well, yeah, but that was your decision to work there. So go and make something of it. Go and make something of anything.
When you're getting into your later life and you're kind of reflecting on all of these things, and the fact that your boss was an idiot, or you didn't like him, or he didn't he didn't give you that promotion when you were expecting it to, it's going to not really give you that much. Whereas I think it's super important to kind of go, this is my life, and I'm gonna do what I need to do in order to really live life how I want to. Like,
if anything, I side with those bosses now. I'm like, actually thinking about it, I didn't deserve that fucking promotion. I was an idiot.
It is, isn't it? It's like
and now I've managed people like for many years. I'm like, I was an absolute nightmare employee. Like, no surprise.
I know.
I was late all the time. I was answered back. Like, no surprise.
It gives you great learnings for future, right? It's like, exactly. I was that guy. Right now, what would I do differently? Right, okay. So
in the same way as having a parent, like, immediately your parents are like,
yeah, I know. Oh, not again.
Have you had that already from your parents? Like, have they been like, see, now you know what it's like?
Too many times to probably
they've been waiting years to do that I told you so thing. Like, that's what it is, right?
I know. I really don't want to be that parent, though, to be fair. Like, I think it's I think one of the things that I kind of look at now as a parent is to kind of try and instill that you make your own decisions. Like, I'll be there to support you in everything that you do, but feel confident enough to make your own decisions. Whether you're 18 months old and doing something that you probably shouldn't be doing versus you're 25. I think it's kind of important to have that mindset that you're willing to try stuff, and also that you're aware of kind of the consequences of doing that stuff as well.
Yeah, well, within reason. I think an 18-month-old, they need some.
Oh yeah, don't worry. I'm not letting her play with the knives quite.
I wanna drive the car. All right, go ahead. See what happens. Yeah. No. I mean, oh my goodness, parenting is a whole other thing, though, isn't it? But I've said this before as well, but it bears repeating. Like, did you find, or I've asked this question, but it bears repeating, I should say. But did you find that you not only had sort of the changes you experienced almost felt like biological, they felt like neurological, that you felt like some element of your brain literally rewire around the time that you became a father? Did you get a sense of that?
A friendly reminder to share this episode with your network, subscribe for more, and join the conversation in the comments. It really helps us out. Thank you.
It's a really thought-provoking question. I don't know whether it was initially. So for context, and I'm always happy to talk about this, like my wife and I have tried for a long time to have kids. So it was a 5-year journey in all, 4.5, 5 years.
Ours was about the same, about 4.5 years.
2 rounds of IVF, ectopic pregnancy. My wife ended up in hospital and almost died, which was great. Through to the amazing moment when our daughter was born. And I mean, at that moment when she came out, it was kind of like absolute, like, overwhelmed with emotion. And then we go home, and I think again, kind of just because you're on such a high with emotion, you're kind of like, oh my God, it's here, she's here. But actually, she's so wedded to the mum that actually she's so dependent on her. It's basically eat, sleep, repeat. And invariably, kind of the only relationship that I had with her over the first few weeks was when she was crying, and I found that really hard. And again, like, I think when it comes to kind of this particular topic, I don't think guys are very good at talking about it, but I've spoken to a few of my friends around this who have also had kids, and invariably it's exactly the same for all of us, but we never talk about it, and no one ever kind of goes to you, oh yeah, you might feel over the first few weeks a little bit redundant and struggle a little bit, and I definitely did, and I was very kind of honest about that. And then I think once you started to smile a little bit and you start to get a bit more back, then kind of the relationship changes totally, and you kind of go, wow, there's something being given then. But yeah, I mean, I think I've grown into it. I was definitely super excited, but fairly nervous in terms of, what kind of parent are you going to be? How are you going to manage it? How does it all work with, startup, wife, baby? I mean, I can remember being on my laptop in hospital at, like, my wife's in labour, and I think most women who have been through the experience of childbirth are probably going to berate me for this, but I was on my laptop trying to get some stuff done and sent over to the dev team, just because I knew that I literally just had a couple of hours, and on reflection I just sort of just shut my laptop and forgotten about it.
Yeah, but really, in fairness to you, they do go on about the labour a bit too much, don't they? I mean, like, they milk it a bit, sometimes it goes on for a few hours, days, like, it doesn't. Yeah, it doesn't really. That's a bit over the top, isn't it? To be honest.
Yeah, you're a very brave man. You're a very brave man.
My wife isn't in the room, so I can get. I don't think she is. I can't tell. I've got this bloody background on. I can't tell where she is. She might be hiding somewhere.
Well, I was about to say, you're just going to pop out in a minute.
I just get punched straight in the face.
But yeah, no, I mean, now I absolutely love it. I absolutely love it, and I enjoy every moment with it, and definitely I think it's important to kind of have that balance between making sure that you're there, being able to see them develop, because they develop so quickly. I mean, I know everyone says it, but you just, and until you've kind of been through that experience, you
blink
just
and you
don't
miss it,
realize.
literally.
It's
within 24 hours, so many things can change. It's insane. Yeah.
But just, I mean, my during the heat, my wife and daughter went down to her parents, which was on the coast, which was a bit cooler than it was in London because our house doesn't really get cool. And they went down for a few days. They came back yesterday, and she's already come back with an entirely new skill set and doing things differently. And you're like, that's just a few days. It's
so funny because there's a lot of similarities in our stories. My wife literally went away for a couple of days to visit her parents as well in Brighton, which is down the road from us. And then of course the IVF story, very similar. We went through a few rounds. We had one success that then turned into a failure. And in some ways, I had something of an inverse experience to you when he was born, in that he was very unwell when he was born. So he was diagnosed with a heart condition in utero. So we had to go to a specialist hospital in London to have him because they have a specialist cardiology unit. They wouldn't do it here; it wasn't safe. So there was a chance that when he came out, they were going to rush straight to surgery and then just operate on his heart. But then it turned out when he was born, actually, there was a problem. He was going to need surgery, but it wasn't immediate. So we just have to come back in a week or two and have it then. So that meant, just save us the hassle. We'll come back later, kind of thing. Let us enjoy the moment, which was a whole other story. Very stressful moment. The staff there were awful. We were kept there for a really long time. It was just the whole thing, and of course C-section and everything like that. So we came back, and my wife is bedridden. She cannot get out of bed. She is in extreme amount of pain for all sorts of reasons, which I won't get into. But basically, that first week or two, then I was taking care of baby. So I was doing everything, and also I've got an 8-year-old as well, trying to make sure he's okay, getting him to school, and making sure Anna's okay, my wife, and everything. So it was kind of like I was the primary caregiver for a short bit of time, and then of course she got better, and then suddenly now she's taken over, and of course she's making up for lost time. And in fact, that's cool. I'm very transparent about this. It did cause a few arguments, which we sorted out, and it's fine. But then it was kind of like. I had to take a step back. So, okay, well, you want to make up for lost time. So, really, taking over. And that's obviously the important thing to do. So it's interesting. I had the inverse. I was like very, very attached and very into it. And then suddenly I was like, but then I still got that left out thing, but it was just like a 2-week delay.
Yeah. I mean, it's such a unique kind of experience, isn't it? And I mean, like, it's so unpredictable. I mean, birthing plans. I mean, what is the point in that? I mean, that is like a startup, right? It's like don't even bother.
That's a really good comparison to make. Yeah. If ever I speak to anyone about a startup and they want to know what it's like, if you've ever had kids and you ever had a birthing plan, that's what it's like.
Yeah. Basically, just forget about it. But yeah, no, like it's a great experience, and I love every minute of it. I really do.
But it's interesting you mentioned like your other friends. My brother went through that years ago when he had his first child too, and I didn't really understand what he was talking about then. But it's definitely something that men don't talk about anyway. We don't talk about anything really nearly as much as we should do. But it's on both sides. In terms of becoming a new parent, the difficulties you go through that just aren't discussed. Like it's always the main things it talks about. Yes, it's going to take all your time, you're not going to sleep at night, but the well-being side of it, the emotional toll and so on that it has, the friction it can cause in a relationship, all of that sort of stuff you're not prepped for, you're not it's not discussed.
No, and I think it's if it's kind of probably one word that you try and look at, or you would say to any kind of prospective parent for the first time, it's communicate, right? Like and it is, I know it's so easy to kind of forget that, especially when you haven't had sleep, and like
exactly.
I mean sleep depression is just like, it's a killer for anything. But it is important to communicate, because you both want to be on the same page, and you both need to know where each other are. Like it's not easy. I think kind of sometimes you forget how hard it is. But yeah, definitely like the communication piece. And again, like me and my wife, we had moments where we were really good at communicating, and then other times I think we were just both so exhausted that we were just rubbish at it, and it kind of compounded the whole problem. It's like, you didn't tell me this. It's like, shut up, like, I'm going to bed. So yeah, I mean, like, it's definitely like one of those life experiences that you kind of learn from. And again, I mean, you obviously you've had two now. So, what did you take from the first one into the second one, or was it kind of?
Well, actually, I mean, without going, because this podcast isn't about me, but without going too much into detail, I was unfortunate with the first time around with my son Archie, and that I didn't get to experience any of that with him. So it's a very long story, but he moved in with us when he was 4. After a long legal battle with his mother. Right. We had separated before he was born, and I didn't really get to experience any of that for 4 years. So, and then obviously the legal battle tells you everything you need to know. The fact that he moved in here, but yeah. So it was interesting. I inherited a 4-year-old, which in itself is we inherited a 4-year-old because we got married, moved into our home, and a few months later he moved in. And for a couple that's been together, we were together 5 years by that point. Newlyweds, new home, and then suddenly we have a 4-year-old. It's very interesting, and that had a whole set of other challenges that I think in retrospect, obviously, like anything, you learn from, and it's very useful, and that's going to set us up for when our current our newborn is going to be a bit older for sure. But it also, if anything, has made us very appreciative, even more aware of what you do in the early days and how it affects the outcomes of a child later on, because there were a lot of things that you picked up in those first 4 years, which we've been combating ever since, right? Like behaviors that aren't desirable and so on. It was like adopting, essentially.
Yeah, I can imagine. And I mean, that's, I think as well, like you say, those early formative years are just so important in terms of, they're just sponges, right? I mean, they pick up on absolutely everything.
And even just something like atmosphere, like so there's a tendency already in human beings to be more disposed to negativity, right? But if you're raised in a negative environment like he was, and I'm not making any, I don't care if she watches this, like, it's a fact, right? Then you're going to be more likely to be predisposed to that sort of way of thinking, and that's very evident, or at least it was. He's definitely a lot better now. He's 8 to that way of thinking. And that's exactly right. And it's just like, when you're hyper aware of that around a newborn, you're trying to the way you talk with one another, you're being very careful. You've got to bear that in mind. There are little ears listening. Yeah, they may not be able to fully understand language, but they can get cadence. They can pick up on these things. And that's incredibly important. Are you saying hello to each other? Are you giving each other a kiss? Are you affectionate with one another? Like, that's all going in. All of it.
Yeah, and I think, again, like we've talked about kind of the personal life and business life, and again, those kind of elements when you're kind of as part of a company. And I mean, thinking about what we've done in previous businesses and COVID, and like how you're trying, how we kind of tried to navigate kind of creating that office environment when no one was in the office was really kind of. And we tried loads of things. Like, I can remember us kind of trying different games and doing like Friday afternoons where we'd finish at 3:30 and have like a company call and stuff like this. And it was really a case of kind of trying to learn how to keep the teams engaged and make sure that they were supported, and just keep that communication very open. But if somebody wasn't feeling well or not in a good space, because again, it wasn't just about the individual, it was potentially about the family and not seeing loved ones. And
because in the office you've got a certain level of control over the way that environment is to a degree, but at home, if people are working from home, you have no idea what's going on there, no idea whatsoever, and that's really difficult to manage, isn't it, with a remote workforce?
It was, and it was, I think, I mean, many businesses kind of experience this, and I think it's I think sometimes it was easy to kind of default and go, well, it's not too bad for me, so it's the same for everyone else. And then you kind of have to take yourself away from that kind of viewpoint and go, actually, no, it was is somebody living on their own, who doesn't get to see people, who's then kind of trying to then combat that as well as work. So there was lots of different challenges, which I think you have to kind of face along the way. But it was it was an interesting time, and I think again it kind of really highlighted kind of culture and those things, which are, I think when you start to think about how you want your startup to grow and to build that team out, that become really important in terms of the environment and the culture that you look to create.
Yeah, and it's like this morning I recorded another episode of this, and one of the first things we talked about was the fact that my guest was just working remotely from Italy for a month. And, we're talking about how privileged we are to be working in startups where you can do that, when the vast majority of the workforce does not have that privilege. They have to be where they have to be for work, whether it's, keeping the infrastructure of the country going, delivering shopping, working in shops, all that sort of stuff. We shouldn't forget that. But then, of course, as an additional layer to that, like you've pointed out, even within startup world, there are people who cannot stand working from home. Like the office is their refuge. Like it's their way of getting away from the home, or just being able to find a place to concentrate at home is not possible. Like you said, they could live in a single bed apartment. I know people during COVID that absolutely couldn't stand it. They couldn't focus because they literally were living like a shared house with loads of other people. There was no common area. They'd have to work on their bed. Like, that's not conducive to a productive environment for them. They were going mad, and not being able to speak with like their colleagues on a quick break, on a cigarette break, and just shoot the shit and just have a laugh to depressurize after a shitty call or something. Like these are really important things to certain people. It's we shouldn't take that for granted at all.
No, and I think as founders, it can be really isolating, right? Like whether you're a solo founder, whether you're a co-founder, like you spend an inordinate amount of time on it. You kind of have to make compromises, and I think it is definitely like one of the reflections, especially in the early days that I took, was actually I probably was a bit too introvert. Like I kind of just solely focused on it. It was kind of my entire life for a bit, and actually that was wrong. Like your friends, your family, that kind of support network is really important to you as part of actually growing and developing the business. And I think kind of cutting yourself off from that is sometimes to the detriment of the business, whether you kind of think that way or not. And likewise, I think as well, when it comes to, asking people for help, actually, there's one of the things that I've been, I suppose, slightly surprised by in a good way is just actually the amount of kind of help that is out there for founders, right? Until you're a founder, you don't necessarily have that, the doorway opened to you in quite the same way, but there's lots of kind of resources and lots of people that are always kind of willing to help or to offer advice, or and I think that's there's an amazing feel in terms of kind of the founder networks within the UK that should be encouraged and should be kind of promoted even more, because I think there's a lot of value and a lot of benefit to it.
Yeah, and speaking to other founders, like you said, I mean, it's just number one. If you're about to go into it, speak. Whether you're an entrepreneur, founder, whatever you want to call it, or whatever it is you're doing, just speak to other people that have been there, and it's amazing how generous people can be with their time. Like I think the assumption is that founders who are, if I ask them for a coffee or whatever, they're too busy, they're going to say no. But the truth is, everyone's favorite subject is themselves, and if you ask them to ask, tell me about your story, like we are today to a degree, it's like, this is why I love doing what I do, not only because I'm infinitely fascinated by you and by people in general like you, and so I could listen to people like you and you talk all day about yourself and what you've been doing, because I find it so fascinating and educational and so on. But I know other people feel the same way. And so it's incredibly useful, and hopefully we're getting this out there to other people to again not feel as alone. So if they're listening to this right now, they're listening like, okay, someone else has been through this journey. Even for me right now, this has offered me a certain level of comfort beyond even just the founder journey, but even the personal one. You're talking about IVF and what it's been like being a father. So like all of these things, we're all human beings. We need to connect in whatever way we can, right?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely shouldn't be siloed. And I think just kind of on the founder thing as well, like it is a very unique journey, which we've kind of touched on today. And actually, the people that are best positioned to kind of offer advice and help and guidance are people that are either doing it or have done it. And that's not to say that kind of your friends and your family don't have a part to play, but equally it's kind of hard to explain sometimes some of the things that you're doing, or some of the challenges that you're facing. And I think, again, it's important to have those conversations as opposed to kind of bottling it up inside. And I think that's kind of important, that people out there feel as though there are ways and spaces and people and things to kind of offer that communication, or that kind of way of talking about it.
And that's exactly why I offer the pro bono sessions that I do for people. Exactly why, because it's just, there are so many people out there paralyzed by some of the absolute basics, but because there are just so many potential avenues people can go down, especially in the early stages, it's like, I can go there, I can go there, I can go there. You just sometimes need someone to go, no, focus on this, keep it simple, worry about that later. Do what has high value, do what's going to start generating revenue or traction or whatever. Just keep it focused.
And I think it's really admirable, Rick, because actually there's so many people that also look at the kind of founders and startup space and go, oh, there's a great way that we can monetize this, and it's always like there's always a cost to something. And I think that's kind of coming back to kind of some of the founder stuff there's
definitely a lot of predatory things there as well.
So much so. And I think sometimes it's just like you say, it's an hour on a call with you that kind of just helps to clarify something. And everyone in startups generally, if you're doing it for the first time, you're probably doing it on a pretty limited budget with kind of you're looking at your cash flow, your runways, and that could be a real changer for someone, just to have that kind of that knowledge, that insight, and a little bit of guidance along the way. So I think it's really admirable what you do, and I think it's really important that there's that those kind of resources available to people to be able to kind of help them on their journeys.
And look, for full transparency's sake, it's not entirely selfless, right? I mean, because if I know that, if plenty of people have said to me over the years, well, since offering this pro bono stuff, which by the way, I came to as a realization for exact reasons you just said. I was seeing too many predatory sort of activities going on in the community, and I don't want to be a part of this anymore, because I was charging for consultation, initial consultation, discovery, and all that. I was like, I don't want to do that anymore. But for the full transparency's sake, obviously, it means that a lot of these people I speak to, they say, okay, brilliant, I'm not in the position to hire you right now, but definitely when I am, I want to use you more regularly. Of course, that's going to be a side effect of it, but that isn't the expectation going in, because it has to be, if you're not leading purely with empathy and with the desire to want to help initially, then what's the point? There's just no point me doing it. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's just not going to be valid, and it will come through anyway as well, I think. So it's just, that's my philosophy. I don't know if it's the right philosophy. I've been told by plenty of people it isn't the right philosophy. If I want to build a business based on that and all that, so I don't care. I can pay the bills, and I'm helping people. That's more fucking important. I can sleep at night. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and like it's about being authentic, right?
Right.
Like, you be true to yourself. Whatever anyone says to you, just be true to yourself, because it's a hell of a lot easier than being fake.
That's exactly like I said earlier when I mentioned the Gary Oldman thing. Like, that's what this show is about. It's just fuck it. This is who we are. This is who I am. This is who you are. And I think that's refreshing in this day and age. You know what I mean?
100%. But yeah, and I think as well, like, just to kind of touch on what you said there, it's also when there's kind of no expectation, i.e. there's a transaction between you pay me X. I think that there's a lot more openness to the kind of conversation and the suggestions that are going to be made, right? As opposed to somebody going, oh yeah, I have to pay you X in order to get Y. And it's kind of like, well, what's then Y? Whereas actually, I think with anyone, a kind of a conversation is always a much more valuable kind of mechanism, as opposed to a meeting, if that's kind of way of explaining it. But
I know what you mean. But if you remove the transactional nature out of an interaction, then it can just become a little bit more open. Definitely. Yeah, essentially a bit, again, going back to this entire podcast, that's kind of why I removed the, I did initially think very much about the interview sort of format, which to a degree, there's an element of that, right? I'm asking you questions and so on. But then, of course, for me, the most important part of this is it's just more conversational, because removing that structure, which in some ways can be a limiting thing, allows for things to be a bit more free flowing and authentic, I think. On that note, though, I do have another question, which is, but again, it's just I'm being curious. But going back to what we were saying about remote and so on, do you see the company that you're building going to a remote model or going into an office? Because you obviously haven't had experience in both, then you can probably make some hopefully pretty informed decisions about what's going to be best for the company moving forward, right?
Yeah. So in an ideal world, it would be a mixture, and I think that's definitely how the world has changed, right? So I think until 3-4 years ago, people, when you talked about remote, it wasn't kind of mainstream. I think we're kind of seeing this kind of slight resistance to fully remote now, and definitely some of the bigger companies are kind of being a bit more forceful in terms of bringing people back to the office. But I do see the value in terms of people being in an office, like that social element, and kind of the benefit in terms of just having those conversations that you otherwise don't have. And let's be honest here, doing it remotely or by virtual meeting just isn't the same as meeting in person. That's for sure. So I think it's a mix. I mean, but I also think there's, it's around the individual, and it's around flexibility. And I think, in very simplistic terms, if they're getting the job done and they're happy to work from home, and there's kind of no real detriment to the business in terms of that happening, then I'm not going to kind of prescribe to someone that they need to be in an office 2-3 days a week if that's not what they need to do. I mean, definitely kind of with developers, and we're on our second dev agency now. I've never met them, and it kind of works, because that's, that dev works in that way. That said, would I like it to be in person occasionally? Yeah, because I think when you can kind of talk about products with your development team in a room, sometimes things come out that otherwise wouldn't do. But yeah, I think a mix ultimately. I mean, I've got both positive and negative experiences around working from remotely. I love the fact that I can have lunch with my daughter and do things on a whim. I also miss being in a kind of social environment that the office brings. So there are benefits to both. I think probably most people would agree with that to some extent. And I think ultimately, for the vast majority, or for mainstream, you'll kind of see that part office, part remote.
The hybrid model, I think, is definitely going to become the industry standard over time, if it's not already. Yeah. Well, look, I mean, there's so many things I didn't get a chance to ask you about. So that means that we're going to have to do another one at some point. Part two. Damn right. Yeah. These 2 hours always fly by. But one last thing then before we go. The very last bit of structure I have in this whole thing is I just like, and look, the whole podcast has been full of this to a degree, but I'm going to very directly ask you, to any entrepreneurs, budding entrepreneurs, founders listening, and wherever they are in their journey, what would you impart as maybe some words of wisdom, some tips, some key learnings that you would maybe want to pass on? And I know we've peppered that throughout, but maybe something you haven't mentioned yet.
I don't know whether kind of any specific learnings, because I think ultimately people, you learn along the way in your own way, and everyone's different. I think maybe kind of a bit of advice to someone who's thinking about becoming a founder, which is do it. For all, like the one thing that I can always remember myself saying at the very beginning was like, just regret nothing. Like the fact you don't want to get to the end of your life and go, oh, I wish I'd just tried that, or I had that idea and I wish I'd, like, you're never going to reflect negatively on that. And I think life is, I've said it before, life is short, but it's kind of like make your own decisions and make your own way. And I don't think you will ever regret trying to start a business and be entrepreneurial. I think always look at it in terms of what can you learn, and I think if you kind of look at it in that way, then you're always going to learn and you're always going to get a benefit out of it, whether the business is successful or not. I mean, that's definitely kind of my approach, which is, irrespective of what happens, I'm going to have, I've had a great experience and I've learned a hell of a lot. And I think, that's all that you can kind of ask for. So yeah, probably not any kind of infinite wisdom there, but I do think,
no, I would argue that is infinitely wise, because especially when the latter part that you mentioned about expectations of what you're going to get out of something when you go into it. I think a lot of the time that's misaligned, right? Yeah. The expectation is doing this will mean it will bring me wealth and power or success or whatever success looks like. Well, when as long as the expectation is just learning, then that can come, but that's got to be the priority, right? In the same way that you've got to have an altruistic priority in helping people as opposed to expecting something in return. It's the same sort of thing, right? Knowledge is your currency.
Yeah, I mean, like there's so many pressures that get put on you as kind of a founder and starting a business. You don't need to kind of compound those with your own of, oh yeah, it's going to make £1 million in the first year or whatever.
Targets come later, right? They do come, but later.
Investors, whoever else will put all of that on you. I think just make sure that you give yourself time to enjoy it. You give yourself time to learn, because it's you need to have those elements in it in order for it to be successful. I'm sure, and I don't classify myself as a successful starter or founder yet, but I think those that have been successful and potentially exited will say that you've got to enjoy it, you've got to love it, you've got to learn and adapt and all of these things, but just make sure that you're enjoying parts of it as well, because it's super important in terms of just embedding yourself into the whole way of life.
Yeah, no, great advice. Money feeds the banks, knowledge feeds the soul, right? So yeah,
damn right.
Yeah. Well, look, thank you so much, man. Awesome. I'll let you go. We've reached the time, but it's been really great speaking with you. And I really appreciate you talking about all this very candidly and openly. It's what we do. So like I said, definitely have to get you on again at some point. I'm going to be following along. As soon as you get the Android release, hit me up. I will be downloading that immediately, as long as it's reasonably priced. Also, because I am tight. But
don't worry.
Cool.
Awesome, Greg. Thanks very much. Really appreciate it. And look forward to part 2.
Likewise. All right. Take care. Have a great week.
Yeah, bye. You too. See you later. Cheers. Bye.
Thank you for watching and/or listening. Please like, subscribe, and join the conversation in the comments below.